Not really picking up here. It's like I almost missed my plane yesterday at Dallas, so I didn't basically eat yesterday at all. So
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Please continue to enjoy your lunch while we go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome you. I'm so pleased by the turnout. I hope that we don't run out of either food or seats. Please bear with us. We had to make do with the room that we could get, and I'm just tremendously pleased by this turnout. Thank you for investing your time and coming to be with us this afternoon. I'd like to welcome you on behalf of the Oikonomia Network and the Kern Family Foundation. My name is Greg Forster. I'm a program director at the Kern Family Foundation. Also here from the foundation is Drew Cleveland, who supports my program. Drew, where are you? Oh, Drew's outside. Hi, this is Drew. If you have any questions, want to connect with us about our program, which you'll be seeing a little bit more about, our contact information is on the handout, which is right here by the door, or please come talk to me or Drew while we're here. We'd love to share more information with you. Our job is to share information about our program, so please take advantage of that opportunity. The Oikonomia Network, which many of you will be new to, is a nationwide learning community of theological educators who are interested in equipping the rising generation with a theological perspective on our work, on economic work, on the mission of the church in society as it relates to the calling of God and our stewardship in the creation order. At the Kern Family Foundation, our benefactors, Robert and Patricia Kern, have a long-standing commitment to theological education. This goes back for decades, even before our foundation was started. At the Kern Family Foundation, we have 3 different seminary programs. We have what's called the Kern Scholars Program, which is a scholarship program for MDiv students. We give out several hundred MDiv scholarships each year. We also have a program called the Theological Education Initiative, which is working with seminaries around finding new, innovative ways to deliver theological education in a more accessible way, but without compromising on educational quality. And then there's my program, which is administered through the Oikonomia Network. My title, I'm Program Director for American History, Economics, and Religion, which is kind of an unusual job title. I have the longest business card in the office. But the title of my program reflects our vision that the world of theology, ministry, and discipleship, the whole world of things that we think about as the church and church life, needs to be integrated with our lives as American citizens, our lives as participants in the society around us. My program helps educational institutions, including seminaries as well as others, to equip the rising generation on the theological side to live out their discipleship in all of their lives, and not just on Sunday morning, and on the civilizational side, to equip them to be virtuous and productive citizens who produce a flourishing cultural life for the benefit of their neighbors and their communities. We have much to be thankful for today. Thanksgiving coming up next week, as it always is when we're here at ETS. We have to be thankful for in our churches that we have a thriving, gospel-centered, spiritual life, and that we enjoy the freedom of religion to have this church life, which millions of people around the world don't enjoy. In our civilization, we have much to be thankful for. We have the rule of law. We have personal liberties, including freedom of religion. We have democratic representation. And we have a national economic tradition that emphasizes productive economic work as an opportunity to pursue your calling in life and earn success by serving your neighbor's needs. But while we have much to be thankful for, it's pretty clear that there are also a lot of things that are going wrong. In our civilization, we see severe disruptions to family life, severe disruptions to the economy, and there's a growing sense that we no longer agree on what is fair or just in public life. In our churches, we experience frustration and bewilderment to a large degree over how we can inspire and equip congregants to live out their discipleship, to live godly lives every day of the week, and not just when they're in church on Sunday morning. I believe the root of these problems is that we have lost a sense of God's calling in our everyday lives. The church desires to help people convert to Christ, but too often it is no longer offering a clear and consistent and unified message on what a converted to Christ life looks like in the context of 21st century American civilization. Likewise, in American society, we have rising levels of idolatry towards sex, money, and leisure, all of which are good things in themselves. But that rising level of idolatry, I believe, is because we are losing a sense that true and lasting satisfaction comes from earning our success by serving our neighbors with productive labor in the home, in our jobs, and in our communities, day in and day out. This event this afternoon is called Renewing the Call: Why Pastors and Business Leaders Need Each Other. Renewing the call because a return to the calling of God in our everyday lives is what our churches and our civilization most desperately need. Pastors and business leaders, because pastors have leadership in proclaiming the word, and economic professionals have leadership in organizing the structures of economic work that define so much of our everyday lives in human civilization. Well, this is the topic that we've asked our two speakers to discuss with us this morning. Our two speakers are some of the most exciting and distinguished people that I've had the privilege to connect with in our work on theology of calling and stewardship. Scott Ray is the chair of philosophy of religion and ethics at Biola University. Among numerous other professional distinctions, he is the author of 10 books, including most recently Business for the Common Good, which is available for sale from our friends at InterVarsity Press over here by the front door. So on your way out, that's an opportunity. It's $10, cash only, but that is a discount even off of the price in the exhibition hall. So don't wait. If you are interested in getting a copy of the book, this is the opportunity. Our other speaker is Amy Sherman, who is a senior fellow at the Sagamore Institute. She's founder of Charlottesville Abundant Life Ministries, is also a widely published author and sought-after speaker. Her forthcoming book, which we don't have in hand yet, but we have a picture of it, is called Kingdom Calling. And if you pick up one of these flyers, they're over here on the table with InterVarsity, you can pre-order the book at a 40% discount. So again, that's an opportunity we want you to be aware of. But you have to, there's a coupon code on here, so you have to take the flyer if you want to take advantage of that. I'm going to get out of the way now and allow our speakers to share with you their thoughts on this topic, but I just want to thank you again for coming. I hope you enjoy your lunch, and I hope you enjoy the talk. Thanks.
Well, Greg, thank you. And yeah, I do. I guess I don't need that. So I am actually very pleased to be here and to share the platform with Amy Sherman today. I've actually had the pleasure of reading her new book. She was gracious enough to send me the proofs of the book a few months ago, and I've already preached on the central proverb that you'll address. I'm sure you'll be speaking that too during this time. I've been asked to do the first half of this sort of tandem thing, and that is why business people need pastors. Okay? Now, hopefully, you're thinking, that is sort of a profound grasp of the obvious, that business people need pastors for a variety of reasons. But what I want to suggest is that business people today need pastors of a certain type and of a certain bent who will affirm some of the right things. And so I want to highlight 3 of those things that I think pastors need to be affirming specifically to business and professional people. And we will, I don't know if Amy will do this too, but I will use the term business people as a broad umbrella to refer to all of the other professions that take place in the marketplace. So I want to point out 3 affirmations that I think are particularly important. First is that business people need pastors who will affirm their work as their service to Christ. Second, business people need pastors who will affirm the virtue of profit. And then third, business people need pastors who will affirm their spiritual formation that takes place in the marketplace. Okay, so let me just say a little bit about each of these, and then I'll turn it over to Amy. First, business people need pastors who will affirm their work as their service to Christ. This seems to me to be the import of a variety of theological themes that emerge from the Old Testament that are sort of summarized by Paul's teaching to the Colossians when he admonishes the Colossians to do their work heartily as unto the Lord in whatever they do. For in whatever they do, it's the Lord Christ whom they are serving. We often neglect the notion that the specific audience to whom this was addressed were slaves, who arguably, it seems to me, did the most demeaning, mindless, purposeless, grunt work available in the ancient world. Yet Paul is very clear in his affirmation that their work was a part, not the whole, but a part of their service to Christ in honoring Him. Okay? Now, I want to make sure we get all of this, as far as I can tell, the way the Scripture teaches this, because it's one thing to say to the business person to encourage him or her to have a ministry in the workplace, to use their platform in the workplace as what I call a strategic soapbox for the gospel. And it certainly is true that they will come into contact with men and women who will likely never darken the doors of our churches or the churches of our students. But most people, I think, when they think about what their ministry is in the workplace, what their service is in the workplace, they think about those things like what might happen when they start or attend a Bible study in their workplace at the lunch hour or after hours. The things that they do with their coworkers off the job to build relationships, the way they serve them or pray for them. But we often, I think, forget that the primary arena of service in the workplace comes as the person does their job. And I would hate for the business person in our churches and in the churches of our students to think that the only things that counted for ministry in the workplace were those things that they were doing when they weren't doing their jobs. Which, if you think about it, unless they're actually engaged in widespread theft of time from their employer, actually only constitutes a very small fraction of what takes place in the workplace. Now, I've had a lot of discussion with business people, and my students have had discussions with business people, and I think it is still fairly widespread in my experience, and I'd give anything if my experience were not the case any longer. But it seems to me that business people in many of our churches still feel like they are doing something less than for God's kingdom than the people who they consider to be really on the front lines of service, which are those people who are getting a paycheck from a church or some other Christian organization. And in my view, that is not only false theologically, but it also contributes to, I think, sometimes the lack of morale that many of our business and professional folks feel for their potential arena of service in the workplace. And I think even some of the ways we talk about this. We sort of inadvertently give our theology away on this. So, for example, when a pastor might step down from a pastorate, we would commonly say, what? He's leaving the ministry. And well, he's actually doing no such thing. Because if it's true that we enter full-time service at the moment we come to faith, all a pastor is doing when he or she steps down is changing arenas of service. We talk about this as someone's going into the ministry by coming to seminary. Or I have students who will say, I left my business to go into the ministry. I said, well, actually, you're doing no such thing. Sometimes they will actually say, I left my business to serve the Lord full time. At which point I ask them, where did you learn such terrible theology? Hopefully not at our place. Because they're doing no such thing. And I think sometimes we fall prey to what I call the halftime syndrome, which I don't think it was intended like this, but I think this is largely the way that Bob Buford's halftime concept has been interpreted, where you move from success to significance in the second half of your life and be about kingdom work, which of course begs the question of what on earth you've been doing for the first half of your life. Now, of course, I think there are times at halftime of a person's life it does allow them the opportunity to do a reassessment of gifts and skills and their sense of calling. But we often expect someone to change vocations or change occupations and do something, quote, more significant. And we often don't know what to do with someone who simply decides to stay in business and do what God's called them to do all along. My experience too, and I hope I'm wrong about this, but my experience, we have a lot of Asian students at Talbot being situated where we are. We have found this tension, this sort of hierarchy, to be much more acute in churches and congregations that are of more typical Asian descent. That hierarchy seems to be a bit more rigid. And my Korean and Chinese descent students have a much tougher time choking some of this down because the pastoral ministry has been glorified, I think, at the expense of the business and professional person. Second, business people need pastors to affirm the virtue of profit and not to treat profit as something that is evil or something that is fundamentally exploitive. If you've been watching the various Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Oakland, all those protests, you would certainly get the impression that the greed of Wall Street, which is certainly true and undeniable, somehow translates to the fact that all pursuit of profit is the pursuit of greed and acquisitiveness and self-interest that goes outside the bounds. I remember when Bill Pollard, the former CEO of ServiceMaster, was at our faculty retreat a few months ago. And he said the one sermon title that he would like to hear more than any other and has never heard is on the virtue of profit. And he equated profit to something like food. That food is necessary for us to survive, but nobody eats to live. And likewise, for the business person, profit is necessary to fund all of the other things that business does. But no company that lives just to make a profit will actually survive and be consistent with their mission. So I want to be really careful that we don't treat profit as the end, but we also don't treat it as an evil either. And I find it ironic that many of the Occupy Wall Street protesters are using all of the latest gizmos and gadgets to communicate that would not have been possible without the research and development that profit had funded. Okay. Third, pastors need business people, or business people need pastors specific. I'm not getting on your turf here. But business people need pastors specifically who can affirm the spiritual formation that takes place in the crucible of the marketplace. This, I think, is a really important part. And Greg, you had mentioned this sort of church on Sunday, work on Monday routine. I think this is one of the really unfortunate things about that dichotomy, is pastors lose the ability to speak into the lives of business people where their spiritual formation, I think, most significantly occurs. And I tell my students routinely, if the business and professional folks in your churches felt like you understood the ethical dilemmas that they face, for example, and in your preaching reflected that, they'd probably fall out of their seats. But to have pastors who are connected with the real life things that business people experience, the ethical dilemmas that keep them up very late at night, the ethical conflicts that they face that don't admit to themselves of either easy nor black and white answers. I think that the ministry of the church would be much more rich in the lives of our business and professional folks. Specifically, pastors, I think, can be encouraging the virtues of trust and trustworthiness, of perseverance, of service, of self-control, of fairness, of discipline. All of those are both required and nurtured by a person's participation in the marketplace. I suggest if you don't have those virtues, you will find it much more difficult to succeed in a very competitive world. But to nurture spiritual formation amidst failure, amidst adversity, amidst moral conflicts, amidst having to lay people off, all of the things that business and professional folks have to do and have to face that can be gut-wrenching times of adversity are also the times when God's Spirit moves so significantly to form and shape them when it comes to their spiritual life. One of the things we highlight in Business for the Common Good is the story of an executive whose spiritual life was profoundly transformed by the biggest business failure he had ever experienced. And he met God in new ways and understood the kind of surrender and self-sacrifice that the gospel was requiring him to, by virtue primarily of God working through the agency of a very profound multinational business failure. And so yes, it's obvious that business people need pastors, but they need pastors of a certain type who will make these kinds of affirmations.
Thank you, Scott. Great food for thought. So I'm part B here, and my job is to talk about why pastors need business people. And I'm going to make just two basic points about that. And the first one is that pastors need business people, and like Scott, I'm referring to marketplace professionals. Pastors need business people in order to be effective missionally. If our churches understand that we are called to join King Jesus on his mission of bringing about transformation in this world, then we understand we have a really, really big, hard, bold, ambitious job to do. And the church leader that signs up for that sort of job is quickly going to realize that it can't be done well unless the talent of the folks in the pew, and particularly marketplace folks, is garnered and strategically deployed. I've become really enamored of a little proverb that seems to sketch out a vision of this bold, transformative work that we are called to as followers of King Jesus. And it's Proverbs 11:10. It says simply, "When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices." When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. And Tim Keller points out that here you have a city, and everyone in the city, including the people at the bottom, are really excited and happy and rejoicing that there is a group of people in the city that is prospering. They have wealth, they have talent, they have expertise, they have power, they have all of these resources. And because they are prospering, everyone's really excited about this. And the reason why that makes sense is because the particular group that's defined as prospering is the righteous. And he points out that this Hebrew term for righteous, the Sadakim, these are the doers of justice. These are people so sold out for God's heart and for God's kingdom that they take all of that prosperity, their wealth, their talent, and they steward that not just for self-aggrandizement, not just for self-enrichment, but for the common good. And so given that that's how those who are prospering deploy all that prosperity, even the people at the bottom of society benefit because this stewardship is happening for the common good. So everyone is rejoicing, and one of the things I discovered was that the kind of rejoicing that they're doing is actually pretty unique, because that word for rejoicing there is only used one other time in the Old Testament. And it's a word that connotes the notion of the kind of rejoicing that we do when the enemy is overthrown, when God has sort of rescued us from oppression. And so this rejoicing in this verse, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices, this rejoicing isn't just, happy birthday party or, yay, they're having lemon bars, although that was pretty serious rejoicing for me personally. This is like dancing in the streets of Paris on VE Day. That's the kind of rejoicing we're talking about. Well, if that's the case, then that should cause us to ask a missional question. What is it that God's people could do in a city that would prompt or elicit this kind of radical, wild jubilation in the streets? And it seems to me that the answer is nothing less than really significant, transformative change in their society. Nothing less than foretastes of the kingdom of God, foretastes of shalom, of flourishing, of thriving, of health, of wholeness, of beauty, of justice. Only those things coming into reality in the city could prompt and elicit this sort of dancing in the streets jubilation. Well, I've been working with churches for a couple of decades trying to help them think about community ministry, and I have to tell you that oftentimes we're not really prompting that sort of jubilation through our outreach. We tend to have small missions, a little food pantry here, a little clothing closet there, and so we look out and we say to our bankers and our entrepreneurs and our architects and our lawyers, give us your canned goods. Instead of asking them for all of their talent and their expertise and their networks so that they can be deployed in this really ambitious mission. So if we are willing to say, yes, we have been called on a mission by God to join him in bringing foretastes of shalom to our communities, the only way we're going to get it done is if we're able to really get the business folks engaged in it with us. We really need them, and for a lot more than their money or their canned goods. Now, as a little side note to this first point, part of this mission of bringing about the kind of transformation that would elicit dancing in the streets, part of that has to involve economic flourishing. And oftentimes I think as religious leaders, we think a great deal about a really important issue, and that's the issue of wealth distribution. And that's a very important ethical question, and we need to spend lots of good time thinking about that theologically. But if we're going to bring about flourishing in our communities, we need to think equally well and equally hard about the task of wealth creation. Because we won't have economic flourishing without wealth creation. And it's the marketplace folks that really can teach us a lot about that. So pastors need business people if we're going to be effective missionally. And then my second point is that pastors need business people because kingdom-oriented business people can really illuminate, I think, in some powerful and inspiring ways just what good stewardship is and what good stewardship looks like. And I think that's really important. we're all, as Christ followers, called to be good stewards, right? We all believe in the cultural mandate from Genesis. We know that being good stewards of this earth is a huge part of our job during our earthly existence. We're not just to admire the creation, but we're to actually steward it, to develop it, to bring God glory, and to serve our neighbors. So stewardship is fundamental to Christian discipleship right here and now. But it's also really fundamental to the life that we're going to spend in all of eternity in the new heaven and the new earth, right? Because we've been told by Christ that our reward for being good stewards here is we're going to steward even more stuff in the new earth. Think about the 5 and the 2 talents stewards. What was their reward? Well, you've been faithful with little. I'm going to put you in charge of much. So we have this really important call to be good stewards during our 70 here on earth. And then we have this endless opportunity through all eternity to be practicing stewardship. So obviously, stewardship must be like a really, really, really big, important concept. And yet, when we think about how we talk about it in our churches, it's often so anemic. It's like Stewardship Sunday, and we've got our little special blue pledge envelopes. And all the lay people are out there saying, this is so boring. Like, who gives 2 hoots about stewardship? And it's not this exciting concept. And so pastors need business people, because business people are out there on the front line practicing this fundamental part of Christian discipleship that's known as stewardship. Think again about the 5 and the 2 talent servants. They were imaginative, they were productive, they were responsible risk takers. They took money and they turned it into capital. They were future oriented. They were very purposeful in their action and their thinking. They demonstrated very practically what it looks like to do stewardship in the way that Jesus calls all of us to do stewardship. So pastors need to know about these folks and need to tell the stories of marketplace folks, because those real life accounts can hopefully get the rest of us sort of jazzed up about this really important topic called stewardship. C.S. Lewis wrote years ago about the importance of literary fiction. He said, novelists and filmmakers play a really important role in the kingdom, and the reason is because they take really important concepts doctrinally, concepts of courage and truth and nobility and beauty, and they make all of those concepts rich and three-dimensional for us, so that we not only begin to understand what those words mean, but we actually begin to feel affection. And so we read a great novel, and part of what happens is we actually want to be more generous people, more noble people, more loving people. Well, I think that the stories of business people really can have the same kind of effect, and take this boring concept of stewardship and make it this really invigorating, robust, and rich idea. I know for myself, spending a few years interviewing lots of these kingdom-oriented Christian entrepreneurs, I've gotten jazzed up about what it means to be a steward. So let me close with just a few quick snippets of stories. One of the folks I got to meet was Gloria Nealand. She's an international banker, ran Deutsche Bank for years, and what she's doing right now is running a company called TriLink Global. And it's going to be the first social impact investment firm that will enable middle-class folks to make what we call retail-level investments in the fund, so investments of about $5,000, in a fund that will capitalize small and medium-sized businesses in the developing world. So it's an opportunity for the Western middle class to basically provide nurture of a middle class in developing societies, which could change the world. It's going to be a huge benefit to those societies, but also the more we have a middle class society in developing countries, the more political stability we'll have and the like. This is what Gloria Nealand is doing. That's how she's stewarding all of her talents. I think it's totally fantastic. Dan Krebs is another guy that I met. He was a finance manager at a car dealership. All right, doesn't really sound like a hero, right? The guy that like sits in the car, thing. But he was sitting in church. His pastor gives a sermon about God's heart for justice, talks about one of the injustices of our society, which is the problem of payday lending. And Dan Krebs sat there and thought, well, gosh, the church needs to come up with some sort of alternative to payday lending. And so he did. And he's created a model, a financially sustainable model in Pittsburgh that provides an alternative for the working poor who otherwise are getting sucked into debt through payday lending. Jim Reiner is a guy out in Denver. He calls himself a serial entrepreneur. One of the cool things he's done is he started a social enterprise that's called Bud's Warehouse. And it's like a thrift store, only it's a thrift store like Home Depot. So it's this big, gigantic warehouse, and you can go buy stuff for your home improvement projects. And it supports the training of ex-offenders. And it kicks off $400,000 in profit to sponsor all sorts of other social enterprises that are also doing all kinds of great things in Denver. And my last little story is about a guy down in Florida. His name is Martin Newbie. And Mr. Newbie owns a property management company. And in particular, his property management company oversees communities of mobile home parks, so mostly lower and middle income folks. Well, if you live in a trailer in Florida, you are very vulnerable to hurricanes and tornadoes. So as a business person, what Mr. Newbie has done, he has said, well, I need to really take disaster preparedness and disaster response really seriously. So he's done all sorts of things through his company to provide those services to people that need them. And he's set up an incentive program so that the people that live in the mobile homes will have incentives to make sure that they have enough homeowners insurance that in a bad scenario of something blowing through, they're going to be covered. And he's going the extra mile. He's being a tzaddik. He's being a doer of justice. Well, I could name off many more people and many more stories if I had more time. But the point is that pastors who get to know people like Gloria and Dan and Jim and Marty Newbie and can tell their stories, it takes this concept of stewardship and it makes it three-dimensional. And it makes it something that the lay people can actually get excited about and want to live out. And I think that's pretty darn important. All right.
Thank you, Scott and Amy. We have a few minutes for questions. We have to respect the time because we need to break up in time to let you get to the plenary session. So I'll recognize questioners, and I'd like to ask you to keep your questions, please, succinct so that we can get as many people as possible. All right, yeah.
Just real quick, Amy, where did you find those stories? How did you get to know those folks?
A lot of internet research, a lot of snowball type research. You find out one good person and you ask who are the 10 people that you know that are doing cool things. Obviously talked with people like Catherine Leary-Walsdorf at Redeemer, people whose stories I heard about. We did a lot of crazy searching in local newspapers, just looking for stories, and then finding clues that these people might be Christians and calling them up and saying, "Hi, you don't know me from Adam, but I think you're like a really cool Christian banker. Could you tell me your story?" But it took over 3 years.
Yeah.
Can either or both of you say something about the role of employing others and being an employer? How that, as ministry, as it relates to what you talked about?
Yeah, this is what I think puts business people in such a moral dilemma. Is they realize when sometimes when people have to be laid off for the long-term survival of the business, what that does to people's lives. And the business people I know who take this the most seriously recognize the impact that has in people's lives. And when they do have to lay people off, they consider it their responsibility to take whatever steps they can to help them land on their feet. This is particularly the case in an economy like today, when if you get laid off, you will likely go for months and months without finding something else. So they take that as strictly a last resort. And even the folks that are in public companies are starting to resist, Wall Street on that, which I find to be pretty encouraging.
Couple couple of these people that I wrote about, one of the things I loved about them was they had a real desire to follow what they were calling the Joseph strategy. You know, I want to be the kind of business person that during the boom years, I'm smart. I don't overextend, and I actually put a lot in reserve. So that during the bust years, I don't have to be in a situation of laying off a lot of people. And I could tell you some pretty fantastic stories about people that did that, but that's one of the principles that these folks followed.
Get the book if you want the stories.
That's right, get the book.
Scott, terminological question. I don't think profit or food should be called a virtue per se. A good, perhaps. Virtue, talk about the virtue of diligence, which typically results in profit, and maybe talk about the good of profit rather than...
Fair enough. Yeah, good point.
Yes, I've lately been involved in a project called Christians for Sustainable Economy, and it's been interesting. You know, we're articulating the biblical morality of entrepreneurship and free markets, and Arthur Brooks's, you know, also ideas about freedom yielding, rewarding creativity and entrepreneurship, which then yields greater productivity, which then yields greater generosity, which then actually yields greater happiness, both for those who give and those who receive. And it's sort of a win-win combination. And this has been fairly public, this organization of late, and we've had pushback as if the church should never be talking to the government about cutting a $15 trillion deficit. So it's interesting being in this space of actually making this case now, and yet at the same time being questioned, well, is this really, should Christians be doing this? And my answer is adamantly yes. Debt is crippling, the borrower is servant to the lender, and we need to make this case while also doing what you're doing, which is to say, now here's a positive formula for success. Any response to that kind of void of public voice about the crippling nature of debt and how we can do that?
I think you're right about that, and my colleague Austin Hill and I write about this in our book on the virtues of capitalism. So we have a chapter on specifically the role of government. And I do think to say that profit is a good does presume certain things about economics and the intersection of theology and economics that I think go with the recognition of market incentives, surrounded by the rule of law and a proper moral cultural system that encourages restraint of self-interest. But I think the point in general I think is well taken.
Forgive me for my bad stewardship. I should be repeating the questions because not everybody may be able to hear. The question was about the level of debt and the danger that poses. I see one in the back.
Okay, in a practical level with respect to pastors, it seems to me that one of the challenges that we have is that pastors are not really, in general, connecting with the issue, and we've had illustrations of that here in the two talks. But have you ever thought about challenging, or maybe the foundation in particular, taking the lead to develop a project to train and equip pastors, if their theology permits it, to actually commission the business people in their congregation? I've dreamt for the 10 years of commissioning everything from businessmen to educators to computer scientists to really see themselves as active in God. We only do pastors and missionaries, so I think that's problematic.
Right. The question is about commissioning people to be something other than missionaries.
Yeah, in my book, I try to give a lot of examples of practical things that church leaders are doing, whether that's small group curriculum, whether that's encouraging vocationally oriented small groups. So let's get all the medical people talking to each other and all the finance people talking and the artists talking to each other about what I call vocational stewardship really looks like. You should definitely talk to our friend Paul here up in the front, because the Kern Foundation is sponsoring a number of really wonderful efforts that are going on through the Acton Institute and at various seminaries. But one of the things Paul's done is worked on a video curriculum that will eventually be used in small groups at churches to really get folks thinking more about faith-work integration. So there are a lot of practical steps that the pastors can take to be involved in this kind of commissioning and deploying the people. So again, at the risk of terrible self-promotion, read the book. I have 4 chapters about it.
At the end, we had our Talbot faculty retreat that met this last August. We invited probably 12 to 15 fairly prominent chief executives from around the Orange County area. And at the end of our time together, our faculty actually commissioned these business folks. And it was an incredibly moving time. It was really a special time. And I think they especially appreciated the sense of collegiality with us, that we are all on the same team in this together. And it was, I mean, your point's a great one. And I've often wondered if, for those of you that teach in Christian colleges with undergrads, we send students off on summer mission trips and short-term trips all the time, but we don't. I would love to see us commission our students who are going to do internships at NBC and
Right.
Universal Studios or in accounting firms, or because I think those are arguably just as much mission fields, and they are just as foreign a culture as you have from halfway around the world.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have to wait for anybody else to bring you a project or bring you a model. We're all kind of making this up because it's something that needs to be renewed. We're all kind of digging it up together. So, yeah. Yes.
I wanted to follow up on the commissioning and suggest that additional follow-up would be appropriate as well, besides the commissioning, but also maybe have, dare I say, pastoral visits to the workplace and come back with a report like you might from the mission field. Consider anything else that the missions committee might be involved in church, and see how that might be applied to the business and professional members of your church.
Yeah.
And I'm speaking from one as experience as the kind of person you're talking about, longing for years to have that kind of recognition from the church.
And see, I think even our folks that minister on college campuses, my students who are with Campus Crusade, I've begged them for years to connect better with business students so that they can understand, the kinds of things they wrestle with. But it's the same, it's the same type of thing.
The question was on visiting people in the workplace, pastors visiting people in the workplace. Yeah.
You both used the moniker the business in a broad way, and yet you're basically giving examples about those who have a certain level of responsibility and creative leverage. Can you speak to what it would look like on the other end of the labor spectrum, where people are trapped in either just the labor or the trades, where their level of creative leverage and opportunity is much more limited than the others in your team?
So the question is, what about line workers?
Yeah. I don't really talk about that a lot in the book because I really did focus more on kind of white collar type professionals. But I did try to ask the question, what about you're relatively new in the workplace, and so, maybe one day you're going to have a white collar job, but right now you're the copy boy kind of thing. And pretty much what I was suggesting had to do with things like imagining a variety of what I was calling kingdom foretastes, whether that's a little taste of beauty or a little taste of justice or a little taste of wholeness, and to think about, okay, within my admittedly limited little sphere, what small steps could I take? And it could be as simple as loving on the janitorial staff at the place where you work. Probably there's even people below you on the work ladder, and just you're recognizing those folks, you're being an advocate for their good in the place where you're working. It could be as small as trying to create a little bit more beauty in the place where you're working, or being the kind of person that goes to your boss and says, I see we have all these internship and apprenticeship programs, and I realize I'm just the person at the bottom here. I'm just watching all this happen. But it seems like we could get more minority students involved in, these different one-day job shadowing things or apprenticeships. would you consider that? So even when you have lesser responsibility, I think there are at least small steps that you can take.
Yeah, and I'd want to affirm that regardless of your level of responsibility, the work itself that you've been assigned to do has nobility and is a form of service by itself.
We have time for only one more question, but a good resource on that question that you just asked, if you go down to the exhibition hall and find the Acton Institute, which is booth 505, they have a book called Work, The Meaning of Your Life by Lester DeCoster, and it talks about exactly that question. It's an excellent resource. One more question.
Would you please talk about why we're in this current circumstance in which there seems to be tension between pastors and business people?
Right. So why are pastors and business people in this state of tension or estrangement?
Well, one of the reasons, it seems to me, is that we have elevated the pastorate at the expense of the business person. I don't think there's anything problematic with elevating the pastorate, but not at the expense of the rest. And I think in some cases, I think we have misunderstood this sort of the common idea from Elton Trueblood that the only two things that last forever are, God's word and the souls of human beings, and therefore the implication is that the only things that have eternal value are those things that make specific investments in those two specific areas. And I think that's a conclusion that doesn't follow from the premise, and that if it's true that that the business person, the professional person is doing God's work in the world, sort of analogous to the way pastors are doing God's work in the local church, then it seems to me that that work has eternal value by definition. But I would say it's a misreading of that notion that has contributed a good bit to it.
I would say the same, that our gospel has been too small. And we need a bigger creation, fall, redemption, consummation understanding of what this gospel is. And out of that more robust theology, we have a better understanding of what heaven really is going to be about and how it's going to be very earthy. And we're going to have a better understanding about God's mission in the world and our part in that.
Yeah. All right. Thank you both, Amy and Scott. Before we send you on your way, just some quick announcements. First of all, a reminder, Scott's book and the pre-order for Amy's book are available over here on the table. Remember, if you did not buy a book, you didn't really go to the conference. Second of all, our good friends and partners at the Acton Institute, as I've mentioned, are in the exhibition hall in 505, and they have not only that DeCoster book I mentioned, but there's a wonderful new English translation. It's the first ever English translation of something called Wisdom and Wonder, which speaks about these issues as well. It's a short little book by Abraham Kuyper, really good resource on this. And Acton also has opportunities for evangelical seminary professors. So if you are an evangelical seminary professor or administrator, go to their booth and check out the opportunities they have available. And finally, our program at the Kern Family Foundation through the Oikonomia Network, we also have grant opportunities for evangelical seminaries. There's a handout on the literature table over here, so if you're interested in these topics and you have any sort of connection to an evangelical seminary, you can find out about what we sponsor, and the contact information to get in touch with us is there, and we would love to hear from you. So thank you again for spending your time with us this afternoon.